I'm Victoria, 42 years old, standing in my doorway at 3 in the morning, watching my parents drag suitcases up my front steps. They sold their 5-bedroom colonial house 6 months ago, gave every penny of the $650,000 to my brother Ryan, and now they're demanding I take them in because family helps family. The same parents who told me I was dead to them when I refused to bail Ryan out of jail for the 3rd time. Before I share this unbelievable family drama, tell me where you're watching from today? If you've ever dealt with toxic family members who play favorites, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. Trust me, what happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about family loyalty. Growing up in suburban Connecticut, the favoritism was as obvious as the perfectly manicured lawns that lined our street. I was Victoria, the straight-A student who spent Friday nights studying while my younger brother Ryan was celebrated for managing to pass his classes with CS and DS. My parents, William and Dorothy, had their roles clearly defined from the moment Ryan was born 3 years after me. I was the responsible one who didn't need attention, and Ryan was the golden child who could do no wrong, even when he was clearly doing everything wrong. When I earned a full scholarship to Yale, my mother's response was to remind me not to make Ryan feel bad about his rejection letters from community colleges. The day I graduated magna cum laude with a degree in business administration, my parents left the ceremony early because Ryan had gotten into another fight at his part-time job and needed them to smooth things over with his manager. I stood there in my cap and gown, watching other families celebrate while mine rushed off to clean up another one of Ryan's messes. Building my consulting firm at 28 was the loneliest achievement of my life. While I worked 18-hour days, survived on ramen noodles, and slept in my office to save money, my parents were writing checks to fund Ryan's endless stream of revolutionary business ideas. The food truck that never got permits, the app that was supposed to revolutionize dating but never made it past the concept stage, the gym that closed after 3 months because Ryan spent the membership fees on vacation trips. Each failure was met with more money and excuses about how the world just didn't understand his vision. The day I asked my parents for a $20,000 investment in my company, presenting them with a solid business plan and projected returns, my father looked at me over his reading glasses and said I should be proud of making it on my own. 2 weeks later, they handed Ryan a $100,000 check for his latest venture, a cryptocurrency trading platform he'd dreamed up with his drinking buddies. He lost it all within 6 months, but somehow that was the market's fault, not his complete lack of business acumen or basic common sense. Meeting Daniel changed everything for me. He was a financial analyst who understood hard work and didn't come from a family where manipulation was considered communication. When I introduced him to my parents, my mother spent the entire dinner asking why I couldn't find someone more fun like Ryan's parade of girlfriends who seemed to change with the seasons. Our wedding was beautiful, intimate, and missing my parents because Ryan had a court date that day for his second DUI. They chose to sit in a courtroom instead of watching their daughter get married, and somehow I was the selfish one for not rescheduling. Daniel and I bought our house in Westchester through years of careful saving and sacrifice. It was a 4-bedroom colonial with a big backyard, perfect for the family we hoped to have. Every room we painted, every piece of furniture we assembled, was a step toward building something my parents had never given me, a stable, loving home. When our daughters arrived, Emma first and then Chloe 2 years later, I promised them they would always know they were equally loved and valued. The monthly obligatory dinners at my parents' house were exercises in endurance. I would sit at the same dining table where I'd eaten thousands of meals, listening to my parents praise Ryan's potential while my actual accomplishments went unmentioned. My company's first $1 million contract was overshadowed by Ryan getting a job at a car dealership. Emma's acceptance into the gifted program was brushed aside to discuss Ryan's new girlfriend, who was definitely the one despite being the 5th one that year. The breaking point came when Ryan was arrested for embezzlement. He'd been skimming from the car dealership, claiming he was owed commissions that didn't exist. The bail was set at $50,000, and my parents called me before they'd even left the police station. Not to ask how I was, not to express shock at what Ryan had done, but to demand I pay his bail immediately. When I refused, explaining that Ryan needed to face consequences for once in his life, my mother's voice turned ice cold. She called me heartless, selfish, and said I wasn't real family. My father got on the phone to tell me I was dead to them. 6 months of silence followed. No calls on my birthday, no acknowledgement of Emma's dance recital or Chloe's science fair win. My daughters stopped asking why Grandma and Grandpa never visited. I threw myself into my work, expanded my company, and tried to pretend the absence of my parents didn't leave a hole in my chest. Daniel held me the nights I cried, wondering how the people who gave me life could so easily act like I'd never existed. I convinced myself I was better off without their toxic presence, that my daughters were better off not learning that love could be conditional and cruel. The news came through my cousin Janet, who called me on a random Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing contracts. Her voice was hesitant, careful, like she was defusing a bomb. My parents had listed their house, the 5-bedroom colonial where I'd grown up, where I'd carved my initials in the basement door frame, where I'd learned that love in my family came with terms and conditions. They hadn't told me, hadn't even hinted during our months of silence that they were planning to sell the family home. I broke my own rule and called my mother. She answered on the third ring, her voice casual as if we'd spoken yesterday instead of 6 months ago. When I asked about the house sale, she dismissed my concerns with the same tone she'd used to dismiss my achievements my entire life. Ryan needed a fresh start, she explained, as if that justified selling a house worth over $500,000 without even informing their daughter. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes before she hung up, claiming she had to meet with their realtor. Social media became my window into my parents' lives. Through Janet's Facebook posts, I learned the house sold quickly, above asking price. $650,000 for the place where I'd spent my first 18 years learning I would never be enough. The closing happened on a Thursday. By Friday, Ryan was posting photos of himself at expensive restaurants, tagging my parents and thanking them for believing in his vision. The comments from family friends congratulated my parents on supporting their son, while I sat in my office wondering how the same blood could run through our veins. The investment opportunity Ryan had convinced them to fund was a cryptocurrency scheme his former cellmate had introduced him to. I found the website, clearly a scam with promises of 1,000% returns and testimonials from people who didn't exist. I broke my silence again, sending emails and texts with links to FBI warnings about exactly this type of fraud. My father's response was a single line, "You're just jealous of your brother's vision." The irony of him finally acknowledging I existed, only to insult me, wasn't lost. Within a week, every penny from the house sale had been wired to Ryan. My parents, in their 70s, had liquidated their biggest asset and handed it to a son who'd never successfully managed anything in his life. Ryan's promises were grand, as always. He would triple their money within months, buy them a luxury condo on the water, take care of them the way they'd always taken care of him. My parents gave up their apartment, confident in Ryan's ability to provide, and moved into his suddenly acquired penthouse in the city. The social media posts that followed were a masterclass in delusion. Ryan throwing parties in the penthouse, my parents smiling uncomfortably in the background while strangers drank champagne bought with their life savings. Designer clothes appeared on Ryan's Instagram, a new Mercedes in the parking garage, trips to Miami and Vegas documented in stories that disappeared after 24 hours but left permanent damage to my faith in justice. My parents were living in their son's fantasy, funded by decades of their hard work and savings. Emma started asking why her grandparents never visited anymore. At 10, she was old enough to remember birthday cards and Christmas presents that had stopped coming. I struggled to explain without poisoning her against them, settling on vague statements about how sometimes adults need space from each other. Chloe, at 8, was more direct. She asked if Grandma and Grandpa didn't love us anymore. Daniel fielded that one, holding our youngest as he explained that love is complicated and sometimes people show it in ways that don't make sense. Daniel's anger was a quiet, simmering thing. He'd watch me check my phone for messages that never came, see me pause at family photos in the hallway, and his jaw would tighten. He'd loved my parents once, back when he thought their favoritism was something that would fade with time and maturity. Now he saw them for what they were, people who'd emotionally abandoned one child while enabling another into destruction. He suggested we take down the family photos, but I couldn't. Some part of me still hoped they'd realize their mistake. Extended family began choosing sides without being asked. Some stayed carefully neutral, changing the subject when my parents or I came up in conversation. Others, like Janet, quietly supported me, sharing information and checking in regularly. A few, particularly my mother's sisters, fully backed my parents' decision to support Ryan. Family gatherings became landmines of unspoken tensions and carefully avoided topics. The family that had once filled my parents' house for holidays was fracturing along lines drawn by favoritism and enabling. 3 months after my parents handed over their life savings, the inevitable happened with the predictability of a soap opera plot. Ryan's cryptocurrency investment was exposed as a Ponzi scheme in a joint FBI and SEC investigation that made the local news. I was sitting in my kitchen, helping Emma with her math homework, when Janet called with the news. As federal agents seized assets and froze accounts, I felt a mix of vindication and dread, knowing this was only the beginning of the real drama. The penthouse Ryan had been renting with my parents' money was seized first. The building management had received notice that the rent checks were drawn on frozen accounts. My parents, who'd been living in luxury they didn't understand was borrowed, were given 24 hours to pack their belongings and leave. The same parents who'd sold their home, given up their apartment, and bet everything on Ryan's promises were suddenly homeless at 73 and 75 years old. My phone rang at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night, my mother's number appearing for the first time in 9 months. Her voice was different, smaller, wrapped in tears and desperation. They were at a motel, she said, paid for with the last cash they had. Ryan had disappeared the moment the investigation was announced, taking his Mercedes and what money he could access. Could I help them, just temporarily, just until they figured out what to do? Despite everything, hearing my mother cry triggered something primal in me, the child who still wanted to fix things and earn their love. I agreed to let them stay temporarily while they sorted out their situation. Daniel was against it, and I couldn't blame him. He'd watched them hurt me repeatedly, choose Ryan consistently, and now they needed help from the daughter they'd declared dead. But I looked at my own daughters and thought about the example I wanted to set about compassion, even for those who'd shown me none. We prepared the guest room, set ground rules, and waited for their arrival the next morning. They showed up with 2 suitcases and attitudes that suggested they were doing me a favor by accepting my help. No apology for the months of silence, no acknowledgement of how their choices had led them here, no recognition that I was saving them from homelessness. My father walked through my house like he was inspecting it, commenting that it was nice enough though not as impressive as Ryan's penthouse had been. My mother immediately began rearranging items on my kitchen counter, saying things weren't in their proper places. Within days, they'd transformed from grateful refugees to entitled houseguests. They took over the living room, commandeered the television, and complained about everything from my coffee brand to the firmness of the guest bed. My mother criticized my parenting openly, telling Emma she was too focused on academics and needed to have more fun like her Uncle Ryan always had. My father informed Daniel that our investment portfolio was too conservative, that we should take more risks like Ryan did, seemingly oblivious to how those risks had worked out. The discussion about timeline came 2 weeks into their stay. I sat them down after the girls were in bed and explained they had 1 month to find alternative arrangements. I offered to help them look for senior housing, to co-sign an apartment lease if needed, even to help them apply for benefits they might qualify for. The explosion that followed was loud enough that Daniel had to close the windows so the neighbors wouldn't hear. How dare I put a timeline on family? How could I abandon them in their time of need? My mother clutched her chest, claiming I was giving her heart palpitations with my cruelty. The manipulation was as transparent as it was effective. My mother had perfected the art of guilt over decades, and she wielded it like a weapon. They gave me life, she reminded me, sacrificed so much for my education, my opportunities. The fact that they'd also spent my childhood making it clear Ryan was their priority was conveniently forgotten. When guilt didn't work, they tried anger. My father threatened to tell everyone in the family how I was treating them, as if the truth of their situation wasn't already family gossip. Finding Ryan became their obsession and my unwanted project. They discovered through social media that he was in Miami, posting photos with a new girlfriend who seemed unaware of his recent financial crimes. My parents wanted me to hire a private investigator, to fly to Florida and bring him back, to fix the mess he'd created. When I refused, pointing out that Ryan was a grown man who'd stolen their money and abandoned them, they accused me of being jealous of the attention he still commanded even in absence. The moment that broke my resolve came during Emma's parent-teacher conference. Her teacher expressed concern about her recent distraction and declining participation. When we got home and asked Emma about it, she broke down crying. Grandma had been telling her stories about Uncle Ryan during the day while we were at work, about how special he was, how Emma should be more like him. My daughter, my brilliant, kind daughter, was being made to feel insufficient in her own home by the same people who'd done it to me. Calling a family meeting seemed like the mature solution to an increasingly immature situation. If my parents wouldn't listen to me alone, perhaps the collective voice of family would reach them. I spent a week coordinating schedules, convincing reluctant relatives to attend, and preparing my home for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. 23 family members agreed to come, from my mother's sisters to my father's brothers, cousins from both sides, and even my 90-year-old grandmother who insisted on being present despite the drama. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon. I'd arranged chairs in the living room, prepared coffee and snacks, and asked Daniel to take the girls to his parents for the day. My parents were told it was a family gathering to discuss their situation and find solutions. They dressed as if attending a party, my mother in her best dress, my father in his golf club attire, clearly expecting sympathy and support from the assembled relatives. I started the meeting by laying out facts without emotion. The house sale, the money given to Ryan, his disappearance with their life savings, their current dependence on the daughter they'd emotionally discarded. I kept my voice steady, professional, the same tone I used in business presentations. Several family members shifted uncomfortably as I detailed how my parents had not spoken to me for 6 months after I refused to bail Ryan out, how they were now living in my home while criticizing my family. My parents' response was a masterclass in revisionist history. In their version, they were loving parents who'd tried to help both children equally. Ryan was portrayed as a victim of bad luck and poor timing, while I was painted as successful enough not to need their support. The money wasn't given, it was invested, and Ryan's disappearance was temporary, just a misunderstanding that would be resolved soon. My mother actually smiled as she spoke, as if believing her own lies made them true. Aunt Linda, my mother's oldest sister, was the first to support them. She lectured me about family obligations, about how I had space and money while my parents had nothing. The fact that they had nothing by choice, that they'd given away their security to enable a criminal, seemed to escape her. She suggested I should be grateful for the opportunity to care for my parents, that it was the natural order of things, conveniently ignoring that the natural order had been disrupted by their own decisions. Uncle Richard, my father's younger brother, saw things differently. He stood up, all 6 feet 4 inches of him, and asked my parents why they'd never offered me the same support they'd lavished on Ryan. He revealed that my father had called him years ago, asking for money for Ryan's bail, the first DUI arrest I hadn't even known about. When Richard had suggested they ask me for help instead, my father had laughed and said I wouldn't understand because I'd never struggled like Ryan had. The room erupted into arguments, voices raised and fingers pointed. My mother's dramatic genes kicked into overdrive as she clutched her chest, claiming the stress was affecting her heart. 2 cousins rushed to her side while others rolled their eyes, familiar with her theatrical health scares that mysteriously resolved when she got her way. My father stood up, red-faced, threatening to cut off contact with anyone who didn't support them, apparently forgetting he was in no position to make threats. The revelation that changed everything came from Cousin Janet. She'd been sitting quietly, but as the arguing reached a crescendo, she stood and announced that my parents owed her $30,000. The room went silent. She explained they'd borrowed it last year, supposedly for medical expenses, but she'd later learned it went to Ryan for another failed business venture. The dominoes began falling as other relatives revealed similar loans, investments that were never investments, family money funneled to Ryan over years. By the time everyone had spoken, we'd uncovered over $200,000 in debt my parents had accumulated from family members to fund Ryan's lifestyle. Aunts who'd loaned retirement savings, cousins who'd given money meant for their children's education, an uncle who'd taken a second mortgage to help with what he thought was my father's surgery but was actually Ryan's legal fees. The scope of the deception was breathtaking, and the room's sympathy had evaporated like morning dew. Daniel returned early, sensing through some marital telepathy that I needed him. He walked into a room full of shouting relatives, my mother now genuinely pale as the family's anger turned toward her and my father. With the calm authority that made him excellent at his job, Daniel asked everyone except my parents to leave. He thanked them for coming, acknowledged their losses, and promised we'd be in touch about next steps. One by one, they filed out, some hugging me, others glaring at my parents. When the house was quiet except for my parents' ragged breathing, Daniel made our position clear. They had violated our hospitality, disturbed our children, and revealed themselves as financial predators who'd used family love as collateral. They needed to leave immediately. My father, mustering the authoritarianism that had worked when I was a child, declared they weren't going anywhere. My mother, switching tactics, suggested they had squatters' rights since they'd been here over 2 weeks. The realization that my parents would rather claim squatters' rights than show gratitude or accountability was the final crack in my already shattered illusions about them. Daniel had already researched the law, always prepared for the worst-case scenario. He informed them that in New York, they had no such rights as invited guests, and we would be consulting with an attorney first thing Monday morning. The look they exchanged, calculating and cold, told me everything I needed to know about who they really were beneath the parental facade. Monday morning arrived with the efficiency of inevitability, and I sat across from attorney Catherine Mills, a woman recommended by my business lawyer as someone who specialized in family property disputes. Her office was deliberately calming, all soft grays and muted blues, but nothing could soften the reality of needing legal intervention against my own parents. She listened without judgment as I explained the situation, occasionally making notes in handwriting so precise it looked typed. When I finished, she leaned back and told me this was more common than I'd think, that family and property made for the ugliest battles. The formal eviction notice was drafted with language that was both legally bulletproof and emotionally devastating. 30 days to vacate the premises, no exceptions, no extensions. Catherine explained that while we could likely force them out sooner given their lack of tenant rights, the 30-day notice would appear more reasonable if they chose to fight it in court. The word court in relation to my parents felt like swallowing glass, but I signed where she indicated, each signature another nail in the coffin of the relationship I'd once hoped to salvage. My parents' retaliation began before the ink was dry on the eviction notice. By Wednesday, my business partner called to delicately ask if everything was all right at home. My mother had called the office, speaking to anyone who would listen, claiming I was having a mental breakdown and making irrational decisions that might affect the company. She'd presented herself as a concerned mother trying to help her unstable daughter, garnishing her lies with just enough truth about family conflict to make them seem credible. The damage control required was exhausting and humiliating. I had to schedule meetings with key clients to address their concerns, carefully explaining that I was dealing with a difficult family situation that had no bearing on my professional capabilities. Most were understanding, having their own family drama to draw from, but 2 major clients decided to postpone their contracts indefinitely. Years of building a reputation for reliability and professionalism, tainted by my mother's vindictive phone calls. Ryan surfaced like a bad penny, calling from a blocked number to demand I help our parents so he didn't have to. His audacity was breathtaking even by his standards. He was in Miami, he explained, working on a new opportunity that would make everything right, but he needed time without distractions. Our parents cramping my style was a distraction. When I actually laughed at his narcissism, he switched to threats. He knew things about my business, he claimed, things that could hurt me if they got out. The fact that he knew nothing and was transparently fishing for leverage made the threat pathetic rather than frightening. Catherine had advised recording all conversations, and Ryan's threats were now digitally preserved. My parents' escalation continued daily, each action more desperate than the last. They invited their church friends over for lunch without asking, presenting themselves as abandoned elderly people being persecuted by their heartless daughter. I came home to find 12 strangers in my living room, eating sandwiches and shooting me disapproving looks while my mother played the victim with Oscar-worthy commitment. The utilities battle began when the electric bill arrived showing triple normal usage. My parents were running space heaters with windows open, leaving every light on, running the washing machine for single items. When confronted, my father claimed they were cold because I kept the house too cool, conveniently ignoring the 72-degree thermostat setting. The water bill showed similar excess, and I discovered my mother was taking 2-hour baths daily, claiming it was the only thing that soothed her stress-induced arthritis. Food became another battlefield in our domestic war. I'd buy groceries for the week only to find them gone in 2 days. My parents were cooking elaborate meals for their friends, using expensive ingredients I'd bought for my family. When I put locks on certain cabinets to protect special items, my mother called me abusive for denying food to elderly parents. The fact that I'd designated specific shelves for their use, fully stocked, was ignored in favor of the more dramatic narrative of starvation. Emma's anxiety manifested in declining grades and reluctance to come home after school. Her teacher called, concerned about homework not being completed and a general withdrawal from classroom participation. When I gently probed, Emma revealed that Grandma had been in her room while we were at work, going through her things and criticizing her choice of books, her posters, even her diary which she'd read aloud and mocked. The violation of my daughter's privacy was the match that lit my rage into an inferno. Chloe's anger was more direct but equally concerning. She'd started talking back to teachers, refusing to follow rules, mimicking the dismissive attitude she saw my parents display toward me. When confronted, she asked why she should respect authority when Grandma and Grandpa didn't respect Mommy. 8 years old and already learning that family could mean manipulation and disrespect. The therapy bills were adding to the financial strain, but the emotional cost was incalculable. Daniel reached his limit on a Thursday evening when he found my father in our home office, going through financial documents. The excuse was looking for stamps, but the reality was snooping for information about our assets. Daniel, typically calm and measured, told my father in no uncertain terms that if he caught him in our private spaces again, he would call the police immediately. My father's response was to accuse Daniel of elder abuse, threatening to report him to social services. The consultation with Catherine expanded to include a defamation suit against my parents for their campaign to destroy my reputation. She'd documented 17 separate instances of them contacting my professional network with false claims about my mental state. The cease and desist letter we sent was returned unopened, my parents refusing to accept certified mail. They were building a fortress of denial, brick by brick, refusing to acknowledge any consequences for their actions. Thanksgiving planning in my family had always been my domain, a tradition I'd inherited from my grandmother and executed with military precision. 20 family members minimum, turkey brined for 48 hours, sides that represented every branch of our family tree. This year, with my parents squatting in my guest room and the family divided into camps, I made the difficult decision to cancel the gathering. The email I sent was simple: due to family circumstances, we would not be hosting Thanksgiving this year. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Relatives who hadn't attended in years suddenly felt passionate about tradition. My phone buzzed with texts ranging from disappointed to accusatory. How could I break a 20-year tradition? Wasn't family about forgiveness? The irony of lectures on family from people who'd loaned my parents money that funded Ryan's crimes wasn't lost on me. My parents, sensing an opportunity, began their own campaign, calling relatives to say I was keeping them prisoner during the holidays. The narrative they spun was masterful in its manipulation. They were elderly parents trying to reconcile with their daughter, trapped in her home but forbidden from seeing family. They conveniently omitted the eviction notice, the stolen money, the months of silence, the harm to my children. Several relatives called demanding I reconsider, guilt-tripping me about potentially their last Thanksgiving given their ages. The emotional blackmail was relentless, each call another weight on my already strained conscience. An unexpected ally emerged in the form of Rachel Chen, Ryan's ex-girlfriend from 2 years ago. She'd seen the family drama playing out on social media and reached out through LinkedIn, professional and cautious. She had information about Ryan, she said, things my parents needed to know but wouldn't want to hear. We met at a coffee shop, where she revealed the extent of Ryan's deception during their relationship and beyond. Rachel had screenshots of text messages, emails, bank transfers that painted a picture of calculated manipulation. Ryan had bragged about getting money from our parents, calling them easy marks who would believe any sob story. He'd used their money for gambling, expensive trips with other women while dating Rachel, and investments he knew were fraudulent. The coup de grace was a message where he told a friend he was setting up our parents to take the fall if his cryptocurrency scheme went south. Armed with evidence, I confronted my parents that evening. I laid out the screenshots, the messages, the proof that their golden child had deliberately scammed them. Their reaction was a case study in denial. My father accused me of fabricating evidence, claiming I had tech skills to create fake messages. My mother went further, suggesting I was in league with Rachel to destroy Ryan because we were jealous of his success. The fact that his success was entirely fictional, built on their money and illusions, didn't penetrate their protective shell. Thanksgiving morning arrived with gray skies that matched my mood. I was preparing a small meal for my immediate family when the doorbell rang. Ryan stood on my porch, designer clothes wrinkled, stubble suggesting days without shaving, but still wearing his trademark smirk. My parents had invited him without telling me, and he'd driven up from Miami expecting a hero's welcome and a traditional feast. The audacity was so pure, so Ryan, that I almost admired it. The confrontation that followed was everything I'd imagined and worse. I told Ryan he was trespassing and needed to leave immediately. He pushed past me, claiming he had a right to see his parents in their time of need. The irony of him acknowledging their need while being the direct cause of it was apparently lost on him. He headed straight for my kitchen, helping himself to coffee and rifling through cabinets like he owned the place, just as our parents had done. When I demanded he tell our parents the truth about scamming them, Ryan laughed. Not a nervous laugh or an embarrassed one, but genuine amusement. He sat at my kitchen table, my parents flanking him like bodyguards, and told them they deserved what happened for being stupid enough to trust him. The words hung in the air like poison gas, but instead of choking on the truth, my parents began making excuses. He didn't mean it, he was under stress, the government was persecuting him unfairly. I called the police while Ryan raided my wine collection, selecting bottles Daniel had been saving for special occasions. The officers who arrived were professional but clearly uncomfortable with the domestic drama. Ryan was trespassed from the property, warned not to return, but my parents' reaction was to threaten to leave with him. As the police escorted Ryan out, my mother grabbed her purse, declaring they wouldn't stay where their son wasn't welcome. My father followed suit, both moving toward Ryan's rental car. The ultimatum I gave them was simple and final. They could leave with Ryan, the son who'd stolen everything from them and laughed about it, or they could stay and follow the rules of my home until their 30 days were up. No more guests without permission, no more interference with my children, no more attempts to damage my reputation. The choice was theirs, but it was a one-time offer. If they left with Ryan, they were never welcome back. My parents stood in my driveway for what felt like hours but was probably 10 minutes. Ryan honked the horn impatiently, already bored with the drama he'd created. My mother looked between the son who'd ruined them and the daughter trying to give them shelter despite everything. For a moment, I thought I saw clarity in her eyes, a recognition of reality. Then she walked to Ryan's car. My father followed without looking back, and they drove away with the child who destroyed their lives but still held their hearts. Social media exploded before Ryan's rental car had cleared my neighborhood. My mother, apparently posting from her phone while sitting next to the son who'd admitted to scamming her, wrote a Facebook manifesto about ungrateful daughters and elder abuse. The post was shared 17 times within an hour, each share adding commentary about family values and respect for elders. By evening, it had over 200 reactions and 50 comments, most supporting my poor, abandoned parents without knowing any facts. The local news picked up the story after someone tagged them in the viral post. Elderly couple claims daughter threw them out on Thanksgiving, made for compelling holiday content. A reporter called my home at 8 p.m., wanting my side of the story. Daniel answered, politely declining comment, but they'd already interviewed my parents outside whatever motel Ryan had dumped them at. The footage that aired showed my mother crying, my father comforting her, painting a picture of elder abuse that bore no resemblance to reality. My business phone began ringing Friday morning with calls from concerned clients who'd seen the news. 2 major contracts were put on indefinite hold, executives uncomfortable being associated with someone accused of elder abuse. Years of building a reputation for integrity and professionalism, undermined by a carefully edited news segment and my parents' talent for playing victims. Catherine advised me to stay quiet, that responding would only fuel the fire, but watching my professional life burn was agony. By Saturday, reporters were knocking on neighbors' doors, seeking comments about what kind of person I was. Mrs. Henderson from next door, who'd witnessed my parents' behavior firsthand, told them I was a wonderful neighbor and mother. But Mr. Peterson from across the street, who barely knew us, speculated that there must be truth to the accusations because where there's smoke, there's fire. The court of public opinion was in session, and I was being tried without the chance to present evidence. A support group found me rather than the other way around. Women who'd experienced similar family dynamics reached out through private messages, sharing stories of parents who'd chosen one child over another, who'd enabled destructive behavior while punishing responsibility. Their stories were mine with different names and details. We formed a text chain, checking in on each other, sharing legal resources and coping strategies. For the first time in months, I didn't feel completely alone. The legal escalation came in the form of a letter from an attorney my parents had somehow hired. They were claiming elder abuse, demanding financial support, and threatening to sue for emotional distress. Catherine laughed when she read it, recognizing the lawyer as someone known for taking cases on contingency with little hope of success. She explained that Ryan must have given them money for the retainer, probably from whatever he'd hidden from the FBI, making my parents complicit in hiding assets from federal investigation. My countersuit was filed Monday morning. Defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and interference with business relations. Catherine had compiled a devastating portfolio of evidence: the recorded calls, the social media posts, the false statements to media, the pattern of harassment. We weren't seeking money, just an injunction preventing them from continuing their campaign against me and my business. The court date was set for 3 weeks out. The private investigator Daniel hired without telling me delivered his report on a Tuesday afternoon. Ryan had indeed hidden money, approximately $300,000 spread across various accounts under false names. He was living in a Miami Beach apartment paid for 6 months in advance, still spending lavishly while his parents slept in a motel. The investigator had photographs of Ryan at expensive restaurants, clubs, shopping with his new girlfriend who appeared blissfully unaware of his legal troubles. Presenting this evidence to my parents through their attorney was simultaneously satisfying and heartbreaking. The photos of Ryan living luxuriously while they suffered were undeniable. The bank records showing he had money but chose not to help them were clear. Yet when offered the chance to pursue Ryan for the stolen funds, to cooperate with federal investigators to recover something from the wreckage, they declined. Their attorney informed us they still believed Ryan would come through when his current deals materialized. Daniel's family entered the situation with Swiss precision. His parents, both retired teachers, offered to help financially if needed. His sister, a public relations specialist, volunteered to help manage the media narrative. The contrast between his family's unconditional support and my parents' conditional love was stark. When his mother hugged me and said she was proud of how I was protecting my children, I broke down crying for the first time in weeks. The company's response to the crisis revealed both vulnerabilities and strengths. While some clients walked away, others rallied around me. A female CEO who'd built her company while dealing with family addiction issues not only maintained her contract but referred 2 new clients. My employees, aware of the situation, worked harder to ensure no balls were dropped during my distraction. The business I'd built on principles of hard work and integrity proved more resilient than my parents' attacks. School became a refuge for the girls once I explained the situation to administrators. Emma's teacher implemented strategies to help her refocus, while Chloe's counselor worked on channeling her anger productively. The school community, familiar with family drama affecting children, provided resources and support without judgment. Other parents reached out with playdates and offers to help, creating a chosen family that filled the void my biological family had created. The discovery came through a routine security check I'd implemented after finding my father in our office. The small safe in our bedroom closet, where I kept important documents and my grandmother's jewelry, had been opened. The jewelry, worth approximately $75,000 but priceless in sentimental value, was gone. My grandmother's engagement ring, the pearl necklace she wore to my wedding, the antique brooch that had been in our family for generations, all vanished like morning mist. The security footage from our hidden camera, installed after the office incident, revealed the truth in devastating clarity. My mother, the woman who'd given me life, entering our bedroom while we were at work. She knew exactly where to look, having seen me retrieve documents from the safe during their stay. The video showed her trying multiple combinations before succeeding, suggesting she'd watched me enter it at some point. The casual way she pocketed my inheritance while checking her phone was sociopathic in its normalcy. Pawn shop receipts were easier to trace than my mother had anticipated. She'd used her real name and ID, probably thinking I'd never pursue criminal charges against her. The shops were scattered across 3 counties, but the items were distinctive enough that Catherine's investigator found them within 48 hours. My grandmother's ring had been sold for a fraction of its value to fund their motel stay and Ryan's legal retainer. The violation felt physical, like she'd reached into my chest and stolen pieces of my heart. The confrontation happened at their motel, a depressing establishment that rented by the week and smelled of defeated dreams. My mother answered the door wearing my grandmother's earrings, the only pieces she'd kept. When I demanded the jewelry's return, she claimed they were rightfully hers as the eldest daughter. The fact that my grandmother's will had specifically left them to me, that I had documentation proving ownership, meant nothing to her twisted logic of entitlement. The police report was filed with heavy heart but steady hands. Grand theft, given the jewelry's value, was a felony. The detective assigned to the case was sympathetic but professional, warning me that pressing charges against elderly parents would bring more media attention. I understood but couldn't let this final violation pass. They'd stolen my children's peace, my professional reputation, and now my grandmother's legacy. There had to be consequences. Ryan's confession came through a recorded call from federal detention. He'd been arrested in Miami after the FBI traced hidden accounts through his girlfriend's name. Facing serious federal charges, he was suddenly willing to throw everyone under the bus. Yes, he'd convinced our parents to steal from me. Yes, he'd told them which items were valuable. Yes, he'd promised to fence them through connections who'd give better prices than pawn shops. His casual admission of orchestrating theft from his own sister was recorded for posterity and evidence. My parents' arrest happened on a Thursday morning. The imagery of 70-something parents being led away in handcuffs would have been tragic if it weren't so deserved. Neighbors watched from windows as the people who'd raised me were put in separate police cars. Local news was there within minutes, the story of elder abuse suddenly complicated by elderly criminals. The narrative they'd crafted was crumbling like ancient parchment exposed to air. The bail hearing was where I drew my final line. The judge set bail at $25,000 each, reasonable given their age and lack of flight risk. Family members called, texted, even showed up at my door begging me to pay it. The same relatives who'd been scammed by my parents wanted me to enable them one more time. I refused. If they could find money for Ryan's schemes, they could find bail money. The fact that Ryan, sitting in federal detention, couldn't help them was poetic justice. The media explosion following their arrest dwarfed the previous coverage. Elderly couple arrested for stealing from daughter who took them in was a better headline than their victim narrative. The emails of support outnumbered the hate mail. Other adult children who'd been victimized by toxic parents shared their stories. The comment sections, usually cesspools of judgment, filled with people who understood that age doesn't automatically confer wisdom or goodness. Ryan's arrest had been quiet compared to our parents' drama. The FBI had grabbed him at his girlfriend's apartment, where they also found evidence of identity theft and wire fraud beyond the cryptocurrency scheme. He was looking at federal charges that carried real prison time. His girlfriend, cleared of involvement but traumatized by the revelation, called me to apologize for dating him. I told her she was his victim too, that charm and sociopathy often walked hand in hand. The realization that my parents might have known about Ryan's broader criminal activities came through their recorded jail calls. They discussed strategies for explaining away their involvement, mentioned destroying evidence, revealed knowledge of crimes I hadn't known about. Each call was another nail in the coffin of my hope that somewhere, deep down, they were just misguided parents who loved unwisely. They were willing participants in their golden child's criminal enterprise. The family fracture was complete when sides were definitively chosen. Those who paid bail for my parents were cut from my life as enablers. Those who understood my position became closer allies. The family that had gathered in my living room months earlier was permanently split. Holiday cards would need new address lists. Family trees would have dotted lines where solid connections once grew. The price of truth was high, but the cost of continuing the lies would have been higher. A restraining order was granted based on the theft, the harassment, and the recorded threats from jail calls. My parents and Ryan were legally barred from contacting me, my husband, or my children. The piece of paper felt like both shield and sword, protecting us while severing the last threads of familial connection. The judge, a woman who'd seen too much family dysfunction, told me I was doing the right thing for my children. Her validation meant more than she could know. 3 months after my parents' arrest, our house felt like a home again. The guest room they'd occupied had been transformed into an art studio for the girls, bright colors replacing the gloom that had settled during their stay. Emma's grades had recovered, her anxiety managed through therapy, and the security of knowing her boundaries were protected. Chloe's anger had transformed into a fierce protectiveness of our family unit, channeled into martial arts classes where she could be powerful in positive ways. The therapy journey wasn't just for the children. Daniel and I attended couples counseling to process the strain their invasion had placed on our marriage. Individual therapy helped me understand that my lifetime of seeking parental approval had set the stage for this disaster. The therapist, a gentle woman who specialized in family trauma, helped me see that protecting my children from toxic patterns was the greatest gift I could give them, worth more than any inheritance or family tradition. Business recovery came faster than expected once the truth about my parents emerged. The clients who'd suspended contracts returned with apologies and renewed commitments. New clients, particularly women-owned businesses, sought us out specifically because of how we'd handled the crisis. The attempt to destroy my professional reputation had backfired, becoming a testimony to resilience and boundaries. My team, loyal throughout the ordeal, received bonuses that year funded by the new growth. My parents' fate was a cautionary tale in enabling consequences. They were convicted of grand theft, sentenced to probation and community service due to their age and lack of prior records. They lived in subsidized senior housing, working minimum wage jobs to pay restitution for the jewelry and court costs. The golden years they'd imagined funded by Ryan's schemes had become a harsh reality of consequences they'd spent decades avoiding. I knew through the family grapevine but maintained strict no contact. Ryan received 5 years in federal prison for wire fraud, money laundering, and identity theft. The cryptocurrency scheme had involved dozens of victims beyond my parents. His assets were seized for restitution, though most victims would never be made whole. He'd tried to write me from prison, letters full of justifications and blame, but they went straight to Catherine's office unopened. The brother I'd once tried to protect from consequences was finally facing them without family buffers. The no-contact boundary was tested constantly. Flying monkeys, relatives who carried messages despite the restraining order, tried to guilt me into reconciliation. They reported my mother's tears, my father's aged appearance, Ryan's prison struggles. Each attempt was met with firm refusal and documentation for potential legal action. The boundary wasn't cruelty, it was survival. My children deserved a childhood free from manipulation and conditional love. Extended family relationships evolved into something healthier if smaller. The relatives who understood formed a tight circle of support. Holiday gatherings were intimate affairs, focused on present company rather than absent drama. My grandmother, before her death, had told me that family trees sometimes needed pruning to grow strong. The wisdom of her words became clearer as our smaller family thrived without toxic influences. New traditions replaced old obligations. Thanksgiving became a celebration of chosen family, friends who'd stood by us gathering for gratitude without guilt. Christmas focused on creating magic for the girls rather than managing adult tantrums. Birthdays were celebrated without waiting for cards that criticized while claiming love. Each new tradition was a brick in the wall protecting our peace, built consciously and maintained carefully. Emma's recovery was marked by a school presentation about healthy relationships. She discussed boundaries, respect, and the difference between loving someone and accepting harmful behavior. Her teacher called it mature beyond her years, not knowing it came from lived experience. When she said family meant people who protected each other, not hurt each other, I knew the cycle was breaking. The generational pattern of enabling and manipulation would end with her. Chloe's growth showed in smaller ways but ran just as deep. She stopped asking about her grandparents, understanding in her 8-year-old way that some people weren't safe to love up close. Her play evolved from angry scenarios to protective ones, her dolls now having adventures where they saved each other from danger. When she told me she was glad I protected our family, even though it made some people mad, I knew she was learning strength alongside compassion. Daniel's support had been unwavering, but the experience had changed him too. He became more protective of our family unit, less willing to accommodate toxic behavior from anyone. His relationship with his own parents deepened, appreciating their health and respect. When he told me he was proud of my strength in breaking the cycle, that our daughters would grow up knowing they deserved respect and love unconditionally, I knew our marriage had survived and strengthened through the trial. The jewelry recovery was partial but symbolic. Some pieces were retrieved from pawn shops, others lost forever. My grandmother's ring returned to my finger, feeling heavier with the knowledge of its journey. The missing pieces were grieved and released, their absence a reminder that things could be stolen but memories and values couldn't. I told the girls stories about their great-grandmother, ensuring her legacy lived in narrative rather than just objects. Speaking at support groups became a way to transform pain into purpose. Sharing our story helped others recognize patterns in their own families, gave permission to set boundaries that seemed impossible. The shame of needing legal protection from parents faded as I met dozens of others with similar stories. We weren't bad children, we were adults protecting ourselves and our children from cycles of abuse disguised as family love. Success, I learned, could be measured in peaceful mornings and drama-free dinners. My company thrived, expanding into new markets with the confidence that came from surviving attempted sabotage. But the real success was in my daughter's laughter, unmarred by criticism. In Daniel's relaxed shoulders, no longer tensed against the next crisis. In my own ability to pass my parents' former home without my chest tightening, to see their old phone number without my heart racing. The lesson I carry forward is complex but clear: blood doesn't obligate you to accept abuse. Family isn't defined by DNA but by behavior. Love isn't proven through enabling but through respect. My parents made their choices when they decided one child deserved everything while the other deserved nothing. They reinforced those choices when they stole from me, lied about me, tried to destroy what I'd built. I made my choice when I decided my daughters deserved better than learning love meant accepting harm. Sometimes I wonder if my parents ever have moments of clarity, if they ever see how their favoritism cost them both children. Ryan, imprisoned and bitter, certainly doesn't visit them. I, free and thriving, choose not to. They're left with each other and their justifications, aging in poverty they could have avoided. It's sad, but sadness doesn't mean I should set myself on fire to keep them warm. The price of their warmth had always been my children's well-being, and that was never for sale. Looking forward, I see my daughters growing into women who know their worth isn't negotiable. They'll form relationships based on mutual respect, not obligation. They'll love freely but not foolishly, understanding that boundaries are expressions of self-love, not selfishness. The cycle that might have continued through generations ends with them, replaced by something healthier and stronger. That's the true inheritance I'm leaving them, worth more than any amount of money or jewelry. What would you do if your family's love came with conditions you couldn't meet? Have you ever had to choose between keeping toxic family close or protecting your own children? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life family stories. Share this with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to choose peace over toxic relationships. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, the family you choose can be stronger than the one you're born into. Stay strong, protect your peace, and never apologize for breaking cycles that should have ended long ago.